Hello, guys, and welcome back to Inside My Head video podcast. I'm Jake Ellenbogen, and yesterday I gave you a week 4 preview of all my game picks, and now I think I'm just going to go along and start throwing out FanDuel lineups. So, for those of you who have DraftKings, I'm sorry, these values may be a little different, so don't go solely off what I have. I think you can go loosely. But I only do FanDuel. I haven't had really good experience with DraftKings, so sorry for those of you that like DraftKings. Anyway, without further ado, my quarterback this week, I have Jared Goff of the Los Angeles Rams. Yes, I'm a Los Angeles Rams fan, but hear me out. Dallas's secondary, and I've said this probably in the Downtown Rams podcast. I've said this on a Facebook Live. I've told many friends. The Dallas secondary only really has two returning members last season. You have Byron Jones, who is a stud. He's still young. He's a stud. He's an athlete at the safety position. And then you have Orlando Scandrick at cornerback, who he's kind of gone downhill a little bit. I think this is an inexperienced Dallas secondary, and I think Jared Goff will be able to exploit that with the help of Sean McVay's scheming. I think having Robert Woods and Sammy Watkins and Cooper Kupp, I think it's going to make things very difficult for the Cowboys. And ultimately, I think for $7,200 and that's what Goff would cost for you. I think it's a relatively higher cost than you're used to. But don't look at Goff as like a quarterback last year. Think of him as he is right now, and right now he's leading the league in passing yards. So I would definitely go with Jared Goff. It's a weird week, a lot of really bad matchups. But I really like he's a little too rich for my blood, but I really like Russell Wilson for $7,900 versus the Indianapolis Colts defense. I think this is a defense that Jared Goff looked really good against. And then I think you saw Deshaun Kaiser make a couple really great plays against them as well last week and make it a game. I think Russell Wilson is a phenomenal quarterback. I think he's going to be able to hurt them as far as moving in the pocket. And I think ultimately he's going to need to play well because right now Seattle's 1-2, and they need a big win, a statement win against the the Colts, and this is going to be huge because it's Sunday night. So if they were to lose, they'd fall to 1-3, and they'd fall to 1-3 in front of the entire nation. So I think you could play him. I would go with Goff. I like the $700 less for Jared Goff. I also think he has more of a chance of going off than Wilson does, but that's just me. Moving along. The first running back slot, I have Todd Gurley, and I went back and forth with this. I felt as though, you were looking at either Todd Gurley or Devontae Freeman as the top guy, and Freeman's $8,500 and Todd Gurley's $8,000 period. So, Devontae Freeman going against a great defense in the Buffalo Bills. However, I think Devontae Freeman, with his ability to receive out of the backfield and run the football, I know they have Tevin Coleman, but I think no doubt about it, Devontae Freeman's going to be able to contribute in just about every game. This is a good Bills defense coached by Sean McDermott, so have to give credit where credit's due. But I do think that Devontae Freeman could have himself a monster game, especially receiving out of the backfield. However, I am leaning Todd Gurley. I think this week, the Cowboys narrative, it's been, wow, the Cowboys are a defensive-minded team. Pretty crazy, right? I think Rod Marinelli is going to try to get a little too creative, try to get a little too aggressive, and I think the Rams are going to gash them. I think this is more of a offensive showing out of the Rams and Cowboys. I do think the Rams defense is going to play way better than expected because people are expecting Ezekiel Elliott to run for 300 yards, and I just don't see that happening. Moving along, my next running back, I have none other than the rookie that is exploding onto the scene. One of the rookies, because there's a lot of rookies this year, but Dalvin Cook in Minnesota is having a great season. He's kind of been pushed, below because the emergence of Kareem Hunt, and I think people are forgetting how good of a season Dalvin Cook has had. So Dalvin Cook against a Detroit Lions team that gave up a killing probably over, I think it was over 150 rushing yards against Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman. I think when you look at Dalvin Cook, I think he can do something along those lines. I like Dalvin Cook as a $7,500 play. And I think, a sleeper guy, if you want to, go with the poor man's pick here, I like Chris Carson a lot. And I like him against the Indy defense. I think he's now the starting running back. I said that coming into week 1. I said he would be the starting running back. It just took a little bit. But sure enough, he is. And he's a $6,600 play. So I think against the Indy defense, I think you could definitely make the case for that. But the two best values, I think, are Gurley and Cook. Because Chris Carson, he could be limited in carries. They may not want to pull the trigger. And they still have CJ Prosise in the receiving game. Eddie Lacy, regardless if he's inactive or not, they have Thomas Rawls. So it's not necessarily that I think they have more talent than what Chris Carson is, but I worry that Bevel, the offensive coordinator, doesn't really know how to use him. So that could be an issue. Moving on, my number one receiver this week is A.J. Green. I think you have a team that's coming off a brutal loss in overtime, Aaron Rodgers' first overtime win, and I think this is a team that wants to bounce back immediately and really make a statement. However, this is also the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals have struggled this season. Now they're playing the Cleveland Browns. Those games are always wacky. I'm expecting a monster game out of A.J. Green. I'm expecting 15 to 17 targets. He is going to be heavily involved in this offense, maybe go over 200 yards receiving on the day, and possibly 2 to 3 touchdowns. I think it's that type of showing for A.J. Green. Moving on, and I also would not even have an alternate. I think $8,000 for A.J. Green is fully justifiable. It's not in the $9,000. I think it's very fair. I think he should be a staple of every lineup this week in daily fantasy, regardless if you're DraftKings or FanDuel. Moving on, wide receiver Larry Fitzgerald, $6,700. I definitely would play him, and here's why. The Rams just had 200 yards total, but just between two receivers. Robert Woods, Sammy Watkins, 106, 108 yards receiving last week against the 49ers. Larry Fitzgerald, guess who he's playing? The 49ers. So clearly, although the 49ers have a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball, their secondary is a little suspect. So I really like Larry Fitzgerald out of a monster performance last week against the Cowboys on Monday Night Football. I expect him to have another monster performance against San Francisco at home. So definitely I would look in Larry Fitzgerald. I think he's going to have a great game. And I don't think that there's... I think the argument you could make, there's one guy that could be a replacement for him if you don't want him. If say you don't like Larry Fitzgerald, there's a guy with the same value who is going against a team that he just has a history of destroying, and that's Deshaun Jackson of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Look, Tampa Bay was brutally beaten last week, okay? Now, Tampa Bay can come in and they can kind of put their foot on the throat of the New York Giants. Giants have a great defense for sure, but how often are you going to be able to stop Deshaun Jackson, who's got that track speed over the top? I think Mike Evans is going to be shut down, but I think Deshaun Jackson, who is a Giants killer, is going to have his fair share of killing. So I think he's a guy that's going to end up over 100 yards, maybe 2 touchdowns on the game. Definitely would consider playing him. I have Larry Fitzgerald, but it's close. Moving on, my really big value pick, London, I think is going to be a shootout, and I think one of the biggest beneficiaries of that is going to be Devontae Parker on the Miami Dolphins. Miami Dolphins, they're not going to win the football game. I don't think Jay Cutler's going to outduel Drew Brees, but I think it'll be a fun game. Devontae Parker, however, is going to have a monster game. I think him and I think Jarvis Landry are going to go off. But Devontae Parker is less than Jarvis Landry. He's 6,500. I love him in a shootout game. And for the poor man's spot in this lineup, as an alternative, I would actually go with Rashard Matthews, 6,000. Corey Davis has been ruled out. Eric Decker hasn't really done much. Taywan Taylor is banged up a little bit. And then they have, Eric Weems. So I really like Rashard Matthews. I think Rashard Matthews did, he's had a good year so far. I think it's only improving his production. So I think week to week you're going to see him start to really take off. And keep in mind, he was there last year. They're building the rapport, him and Mariota. And now, with Corey Davis out another week, I think he is going to have a chance to really step in and just assume control of that number one spot. Rashard Matthews is $6,000 again, so I think that's a good value. I just lean Devontae Parker because I think he's going to have a better box score at the end of the day, and that's really what matters. Moving on to the tight end spot, you have Delaney Walker, who I think is the best tight end in football, and you get him for $6,500. Taking that. Definitely taking that. I really like Delaney Walker. I think this is a Texans defense that's phenomenal, but I think Delaney Walker is a guy that's going to get force-fed the ball, be a cushion, a security blanket, a cushion for Marcus Mariota to kind of fall back on. And I think he's going to end up with like 8 to 9 to 10 maybe catches. I think he'll end up with a touchdown as well. So I would definitely play him as far as the best value. Sleeper tight ends to consider, though. You have Evan Engram of the Giants. I know the Giants' offense has been putrid, but you kind of saw something at least last week. And I think you'll start to see something again. I do think the Giants lose to the Buccaneers, but I think Evan Engram would be an interesting play against the Buccaneers. I think he'd be able, with his speed, his deceptive speed, to really take the top off the defense. Basically bust the seam wide open, and then you have, Sterling Shepard, OBJ, and Brandon Marshall to do the rest. So I like him at 5,200. I'm not playing him. I'm playing Delaney Walker, but I like him as a sleeper. Another sleeper, Gerald Everett of the Rams, 4,500. He will probably be covered by Jalen Smith, and I don't even think he's going to start. But I think they're going to use him like they've been using him, move him in and out. They're starting Tyler Higbee because he's further ahead in blocking. I don't know. I'm not really a huge fan, but Gerald Everett, we saw him against Washington, what he can do on that 69-yard pass from Jared Goff. He's explosive, and last week he played, but he was banged up. This week he's healthy, wasn't on the injury report at all. I think the Rams might need to use him, especially in a game that I think is going to go 31-30 Rams. So I think they're going to need to use him as their weapon, and I think you'll see a lot of Jason Witten on Dallas as well. But I think with Gerald Everett, 4,500 is a bargain if, say, you want to spend all your money on Tom Brady against the Carolina Panthers, since Tom Brady is probably the hottest quarterback right now. So those are some sleepers. I would also watch out for Kyle Rudolph, who has really seen his value dip, and it's because they really haven't used him. Case Keenum has not used him much at all. Case Keenum didn't really use tight ends much at all last year. With the Rams, he didn't throw a ton to Lance Kendricks. He force-fed Kenny Britt, and I think you're seeing him force-feed Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen now. I do think at some point Kyle Rudolph, he was the second tight end last year per fantasy. I think he's going to break out. We don't know when. It could be this week. It could not. But for 5,300, if you want to take that risk, it's a risk. But against the Detroit defense, I think it's an interesting risk that you might need to take. Again, I'm staying with Delaney Walker, but I think it's definitely an interesting one. And then, lastly, Mercedes Lewis had 3 touchdowns last week in London. Everyone's calling him a fluke. And, I haven't been a huge Mercedes Lewis fan for fantasy, but I will say this. Mercedes Lewis is coming in now. He's the veteran guy that's been there for a while. And really, in the grand scheme of things, Allen Robinson's out for the rest of the year. So Mercedes Lewis is kind of that big target in the red zone. Julius Thomas is gone. He's in Miami. So they don't have that guy. And I think Mercedes Lewis is going to be red zone dependent. I think he could have a touchdown a game. I really do. If they get in the red zone and say they're not quite at the goal line, they're not close enough to feel confident enough to leave it up to Fournette, I think they're throwing those fades those 50-50 balls up to Mercedes Lewis with that big body. I think he can do it. And I think he proved last week. So as much as I would almost agree with you that it was a fluke, and I'm sure he won't have 3 touchdowns again this year, I would consider picking him up in regular fantasy. And also at $4,500 value, I think he's a really interesting play against a Jets defense that I think is very good, and I think they're going to have a lot of goal line stands. So I have the Jets winning that game, so I think they're going to need Mercedes Lewis. So moving along to kicker, I think Matt Prater is the guy you need to go. $4,800. Great kicker. I think he's in for a good game. So are the Lions. They're in for a close game against the Minnesota Vikings. I think the Vikings defense could get a couple stops. Basically the Halls in the red zone and just in their territory, and I think Matthew Stafford is going to keep throwing the ball, but I think you could see a lot of Prater, and Prater, he's capable of hitting that big 57-yard field goal and putting it right through the uprights without ease. So, or with ease. So I think Matt Prater's a good one to play this week. I think Greg Zuerlein for the Rams would be interesting if Dallas's defense is for real. The Rams could have a couple stalls in the red zone, or they might not make it to the red zone, get to the 40, and they call him Greg the Leg for a reason. So I think you could see that, as well as Ryan Suckup for the Titans. I think he is a good play as well, because of the fact that they're playing the Texans, and I think the Texans are, they'll let them probably drive on them, but I don't think there's going to be a ton of touchdowns in that game. I think Suckup is a good kicker, and he's killing it this year. I think he's number 1 in fantasy for kickers. So definitely those are 3 guys. I would play Prater, but those are guys that you also want to keep in mind. And lastly, I have the defense. I'm picking the Falcons against Buffalo, and I have no other reason to believe in anything else besides the fact that Buffalo doesn't have an offense. I had a hard time picking the defense because when you look at it, you want to pick Denver, right? Denver has, basically overpowered, has, completely destroyed some of these offenses. But I gotta say, the Raiders are coming off a really disappointing showing on Sunday Night Football, big primetime game against the Redskins. And a lot of people are coming out and saying they were exposed. I'm not expecting them to win the game. I think it's going to be Denver's game. But I think Oakland needs to come out, and I think they're going to prove it. And I think Derek Carr is going to have a great game. They just fall a little bit short. I do not think by any means that they're worth betting on, because Denver's defense, as great as it is, Derek Carr's really great. Amari Cooper's really great. Michael Crabtree's really great, and we haven't seen Marshawn Lynch break out yet, and I'm sure we'll probably get a game here and there where he breaks out. I don't think he's going to, run for over 1,000 yards, but I think he'll have a breakout game. I don't want this to be the breakout game, so I'm not picking the Broncos. I think the Falcons is an easy play. I think they have a good defense. I think they have an underrated defense, and no one on the Buffalo offense really scares me. As much as I like Tyrod Taylor, I don't think that they don't scheme well enough for him, and they don't have Sammy Watkins anymore. They don't have Robert Woods anymore. The run game is good. Don't get me wrong, and it's always been. But I would be worried more about getting gashed, through the air, and I just don't see that in Buffalo. So I think the Falcons are a good play. I think this could be a close game. I think Buffalo's defense is going to hold the Falcons' offense pretty well. So I would go with the Falcons defense. I think, some sleepers. I think you could go with the Rams defense against Dallas. That's a big sleeper. That's risky. You saw the Rams come out and dominate the Colts and have 14 points worth of defensive points. But my issue is that the Rams can't stop the run. So you're basically banking on Wade Phillips turning the defense around in just a week, or a little bit over a week, because they've had 10 days to prepare, which, again, I could definitely see, but I don't know if I'd be putting money on that. So those are my picks. Let me know what your fantasy lineup is down below. and subscribe and keep in touch, because I will be doing these weekly. I'll be doing the weekly picks weekly, and I might have some other videos thrown in there. But for Jake Ellenbogen, that is me. I thank you guys for watching, and you guys enjoy your NFL Sunday. Later.